Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews. I'm officiating initially because the first item is the election of a chairman. Can I ask from the councillors, please, for any nominations for the position of chairman?
I'd like to propose Councillor Anne.
Okay. Any other nominations? Oh, can I have a seconder for that? Okay.
And yeah, I'd like to propose Councillor Bungay, please.
Okay. And seconder for that, please.
Yeah, I'd second that, please. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. On the basis that we have a contested election for chair, the constitution of the new BCP Council calls for a secret ballot. So we now require the ballot papers to be prepared and for the secret election ballot to take place. Okay, the vote was 4 for Councillor Bungay and 3 for Councillor Fowler. So Councillor Bungay is elected chairman of the Standards Committee and he will now take over the officiation of the meetings.
Thank you, members. I hope we can all work together successfully on this committee this time. Nominations for the vice chair. Can I have nominations? Councillor Rigby.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Barron, please.
Okay. Councillor Jones.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Fowler.
I second that.
Okay, and have we a seconder for Councillor Barron?
Yes, I would second Councillor Barron.
Thank you. Another ballot, please. with a vote of 4-3, Councillor Barron is elected as Vice Chair, if you'd like to join us. The next item on the agenda is apologies. As we have a full house, I don't think we need to take that at all, so we can dispense with that. I don't think we have any shadow members. Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Has any member anything they need to declare? Thank you very much. Item 5 is the review of a complaint which was heard under the previous council of Bournemouth. You have had the agenda with the assessment and the recommendations attached. Would any member like to speak on this at all?
Sorry, Chairman. We do have a public question that has come in from Mr. Olubi on this item that relates to this report. So it is for the committee to hear the public question from Mr. Olubi before you consider this item. If the committee agrees to that process, that then would constitutionally be appropriate.
Thank you very much. Right, this is a letter from the... thank you for your question. We report the relating issue we are now considering. Sorry?
Yeah, he needs to ask the question. That's your response after the question. He's got a question to put.
Right.
So you need to ask
Mr.
him.
Luby.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, councillors. Following the local government ombudsman's rulings that investigating my complaint against Councillor Mike Green, former Standards Committee Chair Councillor Dunlop failed to consult with other members of the committee and withheld information from Councillor Kieran Wilson, can the committee assure me that there will now be a full and fair investigation of my complaint? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luby. Thank you for the question. We have a report relating to this issue that we will now be considering, which recommends a way forward. I hope provide you with a response to this question. Members, you've heard Mr. Luby. The substance of the original Ombudsman's reasons for referring this back not once but twice are contained in the report. You can see the recommendation that this now be considered by myself and one of the independent persons, of which we have 3 here, and I omitted to welcome you, gentlemen, but I'll do that in a minute. Members, would you have any comments on this, or are you happy for us to proceed as set out?
Yeah, I'm happy to proceed. Have you said, having read the report, I think that's definitely the right way to refer it back to an independent person to look at. Clearly, this has been going on for some period of time now, and obviously does need to be resolved, so I'm supportive of that. Just wondered whether you could perhaps outline more about the actual process, and perhaps when a report would come back to committee, would that be the next meeting? Because I think, bearing in mind, as I say, the time needs to be going on, I think we really do need to draw a line under this as soon as possible. So I welcome some advice on that.
time frame on this?
Thank you, Chairman, and through you. The recommendation is that a review be carried out by an independent person, possibly engaging the others as well in consultation with you. I think you're right. I think it does need to move fairly quickly, although not be over-rushed in a considered way. I also think it's, for the record as well, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to be engaged in that process, and I would suggest that Richard Jones, as the Head of Democratic Service and Deputy Monitoring Officer for complaints issues, leads on that and liaises with the independent persons and with yourself, Chairman, to then agree a process and then share that with the members of the committee and take that forward and then bring a report back to your next meeting as to the position. But just for the record, I would not be taking part in that because I was engaged in the earlier process and it wouldn't be appropriate.
Thank you. Sorry, if no one wishes to speak on it, can I have a proposer and seconder that we proceed as set out?
Happy to propose as set out.
And I'll second that.
As proposed and seconded. Can we take a vote on it? Show of hands, those in favour? I'll vote on it as well. That's unanimous. Thank you. Perhaps at the end of the meeting, our independent persons can liaise with Mr. Jones and try and sort some dates out. And welcome, gentlemen. We have three independents, not just one, three independent persons now, because we're such a big place. So welcome to the meetings, and Mr. Sibley, I know you evolved from the Christchurch times, but welcome here. Thank you. Would the independent persons perhaps like to stand up and introduce themselves to our residents sitting there watching in interest? Thank you.
I don't really need that. I'm a civil servant, I work at Blandford, and I'm here because I'm interested in local government and making sure that the electorate are fully represented and they get their rights. Yeah? I'm a taxpayer and I'm a voter, same as you guys. Yeah? Thank you.
Yes, good evening everybody. Ian Sibley. I live in Christchurch also. I've had experience as a magistrate for 20 years, valuation tribunal work. I was also on the original standards committee when it was Christchurch Borough Council. It's now defunct, of course. And then we combined with East Dorset, and I carried on as the independent person for Christchurch covering East Dorset also. I still carry out other public duties. I'm chair of our local primary school. I'm well used to working as a threesome, so I'm more happy that it's better justice if there's three of us than if it's just one person. We have it in the court system, why not here? I think that's about all. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Story. I'm a barrister by day. I was brought up in this area, but now live elsewhere. But my family live here still, and I'm very pleased to come back as often as I can. My day job involves a lot of work with professionals and in relation to their professional standards. And so this is a slightly familiar area, although it's not one that it's not a role that I've served in any previous council or indeed here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Item 6 is the procedures for initial complaint assessment. Again, there is a paper attached, which hopefully members have browsed through. Does the officer wish to speak on this at all? Mr. Jones is going to speak on this.
Thank you, Chairman and members. The Constitution sets out in Article 10 your roles and responsibilities as the Standards Committee. That's reproduced in the report in Section 4 as an extract. Part 6 of the Constitution sets out the Code of Conduct, the requirements for disclosable pecuniary interests, the Councillor Officer Protocol, which is part of the Code of Conduct, and the arrangements for dealing with allegations for breaches of the Code of Conduct. These each require formal review in due course and you will be involved at that, and that's considered as part of the work programme later on in terms of scheduling that review. The arrangements for dealing with allegations are set out also within the Part 6 of the Constitution. That states that the process for an initial filtering will be exercised by the Chairman of the Standards Committee in consultation with councillors and the monitoring officer, and to decide whether there is no breach of the code and no action should be taken, whether there is a potential breach and an informal resolution is appropriate, or whether a potential breach of the code has occurred and there should be a formal investigation. It doesn't expand on that in terms of defining exactly who should be involved in that process, how that consultation should take place, the criteria to be used for considering whether no further action should be taken, and defining what should be included as suitable informal resolution. The appendix that's set out in the document addresses each of those issues. So, for example, it's defining that where it states the monitoring officer, that would make reference to myself as the deputy monitoring officer in the absence of the monitoring officer. That reference to councillors of the Standards Committee should include the independent persons in that process. And again, then expanding out the consultation in terms of 5 days and carrying out that by email. Section 3 in the appendix, which is on page 13 of your agenda, then sets out in a bit more detail in terms of the criteria that could be used in assessing whether at that initial stage, whether a complaint whether there should be no further action or whether there should be informal action. This doesn't deal with the formal investigation level, so this is only dealing at that filtering stage. So section 3 is key on pages 13 and 14, and section 4 then deals with the recommendations in terms of the informal resolutions that would be appropriate. Obviously they're set out in detail in the report. I'm not intending to read through each individual one, but happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
Members, has anyone any questions for the officer?
Yes, I'm going to Appendix 1, Item 2, Method of Consultation. The idea is to do it electronically by email. I would like to know whether reference those 14 grounds for consideration in Section 3.1, whether the officers are going to give the members some advice, because obviously a complaint comes in, arguably you hear the complaint, but is let's say it's a councillor being complained about, is the councillor going to be able to make some initial observation about that complaint, so you hear initially two sides of the story? And secondly, are the officers going to give any advice at all reference the complaint, or is it purely the cold complaint that's come in that's going to be passed over to the councillors for the initial consultation?
There would be guidance. I mean, we come on to in terms of training and so on the next agenda item actually, but there will be guidance and probably a steer in terms of precedents that have been set previously that may come forward. We would clearly welcome views from councillors, and that's part of that engagement process and comments. And whilst it's saying that there's 5 days, clearly it depends on the complexity of the complaint. That may well be extended. It may well be that we need to meet as a group and have a further discussion. But it does depend on the nature of that complaint, but it would be a minimum of 5 days. So we wouldn't be saying you've only got tomorrow, can I have your comments by tomorrow? So it would be adjusted depending on the nature and complexity of that complaint. But we would certainly give advice to members in drawing that conclusion. But again, that would be part of that engagement process and obviously led by the chairman of the committee.
And just one quick supplemental query, again, you're going to give us advice and guidance. Would you be advising the councillors not to talk to the councillor who's being complained about?
Yes, I would, but you referred to the councillor complained about having the right to submit an initial response. That is there. So it's not within this appendix, because this is dealing with how you then consider, as the chairman, consulting with you at that filtering stage. Before that, the councillor who is the subject of the complaint will have been advised what the complaint is and been given an opportunity to put in an initial response. So they've got the right to provide a full response if it's investigated in the future, but an initial response. So yes, you will have two sides to the story, as it were, at that point, at that initial point.
Councillor Fire.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm wary of this sort of complaint being described to us by email and then discussed by email. We've seen this week an email which went astray from the British ambassador in America. Emails are funny things. It's very easy. I know we're all very honourable and we're very good, but I'm wary of that, and it also means that it's a difficult thing to have a discussion about, because we're all sitting in our own places, and some of the complaints that come in, and there are a few of us around this table who've done this before, some of them that come in are really serious, others are more frivolous, and the assessment of that, I think, needs to be, I know it's a nuisance for everybody, but I really think that the more serious complaints, and that would have to be a judgment of the officers, I think, need at least a group of 3 or 4 to meet together to discuss. I just don't, I don't like that idea. I know we're secure, but people aren't secure, and it worries me.
Yes, Chairman, I have some concerns in view of the questions that have been raised. I sat for over 21 years as a magistrate and 10 of them as a court chairman. And we are a political body and we work together in groups and individuals. If someone has a complaint, they almost inevitably have talked to colleagues about it, and the person complained about will almost inevitably talk to colleagues about it too. It's very difficult for members of the Standards Committee to avoid that, but if we hear one side, I think we either must immediately withdraw from that situation, or we must be prepared to hear the other side, whether it's outside a formal meeting or not. I can't see how we can avoid, if you like, being lobbied by one side or the other or both. And if we hear one side, should we be hearing the other? There needs, I think, to be some clear guidance on how that would happen. I just think it's because of the nature of the beast, if you like, of the council and how things work. The complaints are about members of this council, or will be about members of this council that come to us, and they are all colleagues of ours. So how can that be avoided? And if it isn't, I think we may have to be very upfront as to what sort of discussions we've been part of, or of whether we've been lobbied or not.
Having years ago been in that position, I took a leaf out of the planning book. I will sit and have a cup of coffee with you and I will chat to you, but the minute you raise that subject, I will get up and walk away. We're friends, but there is a line that cannot be crossed in that particular case, and I found that served me quite well.
Chairman, with respect, that needs to be clear guidance, because you may well have been prepared for that situation. Somebody might hear half the story before they even realise what it's about, or that there is a formal complaint going on.
I think perhaps the officers would like to come back, and this may form part of our training.
In relation to the process and the way in which that consultation is undertaken, I think at the moment the Constitution is clear. It states that the chairman has that initial filtering decision-making power and should exercise that in having consulted with the independent persons and the other members of the committee. That's the future and you want to change that, but at the moment that sits with the chairman and it's how that consultation takes place. I think some of that has to happen electronically initially, that initial consultation with councillors through the secure email route that we have, but we could amend paragraph 2 to state that it would be undertaken initially by email, and that if one of you as members of the committee or the chairman or an independent person felt that actually this warranted a discussion or a more detailed conversation, then we would look, you would have to, the chairman would have to consider that and decide whether to facilitate that. It's possible that if we have a number of complaints ongoing at the same time, there may be merit in any event. It might be more efficient to convene a meeting to discuss the initial filtering of complaints that are coming in. So we could amend that part to just make that meeting a possibility and refer to that in there, so it's clear that it's not purely by email. I think then over the next 2 months you're going to have to review how that works, and I've got an item further on regarding training, and one of the suggestions is that you have a workshop training session with the independent persons and yourselves in early mid-September to look at how these issues of conflicts, relationships with other councillors, how you're working with the independent persons, how are you going to review the code, how the arrangements are working, that can take place at that point, and you can have that discussion then. That's the suggestion. If you wanted to incorporate that, then we could change that.
Would members like that?
Thank you. Just looking at Appendix 1, Paragraph 3, there's points 2 and 3 about the matter complaints about happening more than 12 months before the complaint was received, and the complainant's notice 6 months. Is there a reason that we're putting in times that a complaint can be submitted within? Because from an outside perspective, it can look as though we're looking for reasons to not progress anything. I mean, I'd expect if a complaint was raised, it would be quite early on when someone had noticed something, but it may be that if it's a member of the public, they're unaware that it's something contained within the Code of Conduct and they don't realise for a longer period.
Chairman, members, I mean those dates are in that they're actually in line with the Ombudsman Service deadline timelines for investigations. I think that's probably why they're in for those sort of timelines. I mean, they are discretionary. You could change those, you could remove them. It's up to members really.
Members, you've heard the answer. Are you content to leave it as it is, or would you like them?
Chairman, I think this is all new for lots of us, and it's a new council, and like so many other committees, I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to review it, perhaps in 6 months' time, as things arise and we can see that they're not working as well as we'd like. Perhaps they can be noted, or not wait for 6 months. If it becomes apparent in less time than that something's not right, I'm sure we'll all agree to amend it at that stage.
Yes, as I see it, this is a living document. It's not cast in stone. And there may well be changes, because I've read somewhere that there is a debate going on about whether there should be heavier sanctions on councillors that misbehave. If that comes through, then this again will have to be amended. So it's not cast in stone, and if members do feel uneasy as we progress, then please bring it to me and to the committee, and we can look at ways of changing things if everybody agrees. Thank you.
Chairman, if it's jumping ahead of the agenda items, but again, Tanya referenced maybe in September looking at that. When we get to the work programme on page 31, actually the 8th of October is identified as reviewing the Code of Conduct, the Officer Protocol, the arrangements for dealing with complaints. So we can look at re-examine that timeline at that point as well. So all of those options can be looked at that October meeting with a September informal review as well in terms of a working group.
Do any other members wish to speak on this?
Just one minor query. We talk about consulting with the members, possibly by email. In terms of if I want to make a complaint, I'm Joe Public, how are we, and it may be in your papers here, but you can point me to it, how are we expecting people to make a complaint? In writing, which is signed, or are we accepting complaints by email only?
The Code of Conduct sets out the process for receiving complaints. There's a online form that complainants can use to complete. That can be printed themselves. They can complete that offline. They can handwrite that out on that form. The form is very useful in that it structures the complainant to identify issues that they believe the councillor has breached in terms of the code. But again, if we had a written complaint and it met those criteria, we would equally accept that. But again, we would encourage the form to be used because it is structured, it does address the particular issues, it highlights the breaches that are alleged and the remedies that the complainant is seeking. But if all of those were picked up in a letter, then we would equally deal with that as well.
Is there a way, if people are not on the internet, and there are quite a lot of elderly people that do not use computers, that they can access the information as to who they write into? Do they have to come in to the offices and ask to see someone to get in a name and an address, or is it readily available out in the public field? I mean, perhaps we could, like in the BH Live magazine that goes out, incorporate something in there for information for people, because not everyone, as I say, has access to computer or is computer literate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy to take away the two issues there. One of the availability of the form and contact numbers as to contact. We do get queries coming through the switchboard, through customer, not switchboard, through the customer services, and then we will ring them back, post them forms out. We have posted them before, so that is coming in. If you want to take, we could take away from this meeting, if you wish, some sort of article or publicity for you as a new standards committee to introduce you and your role and publicise the availability of the complaints process in BH Live or publication, if you wanted us to do that.
Would members be happy for that to happen? Just give more information to the public. We are saying we want to be open and clear.
Just to say that we've been planning the next edition of our residents' newspaper to go out during September. We've been planning that today. There's space to put something in, so we'll take that up, put it in there.
I want to propose it, Jen.
Thank you, Chairman, members. This report's coming to you. It's an operational document, the Member Development Framework, but it's following on from the induction programme that we've delivered, and in terms of some of the essentials for new councillors and existing councillors. That included code of conduct, planning, licensing, those sorts of issues, ICT, and this is really setting a programme really that we can work to deliver further continuous training for councillors on a rolling programme really for the duration of your term. The framework itself is focused around core competencies that councillors could possess. That's actually from an LGA guidance document in terms of the structure of that document. We not only though wish to deliver training that is suitable for or targeted to all councillors, there may be individual focused training as well for particular councillors with particular requirements or who are serving particular roles. So again, it needs to be fluid, it needs to be to maximise the opportunities that we have for councillors, but equally in a structured way. Well, there are clearly limited resources. This is not an open check to deliver any training we want, and we would clearly want to deliver that training internally wherever possible. We have some very knowledgeable and skilled officers, but there may be times where we need to bring in extra training to develop specialist areas. As I said, this is really operational, so we could, as officers, go ahead with that, but it would be good, I think, to get some sanction from councillors in terms of that. In terms of the framework itself, it doesn't all fall under ethical governance and code of conduct, but clearly if you have highly skilled councillors with knowledge in the required areas, then you would hope that that would tick a few boxes in terms of maintaining that ethical framework agenda. We talked about training earlier on, and clearly delivery of training for councillors in terms of the standards committee as well could equally be pulled into that process. So it's asking really for your endorsement of the framework, or to note the framework, and to oversee that framework delivery by receiving periodic reports in terms of the training that's delivered. And equally, when you have complaints and you're dealing with issues, there may be something that comes up or a theme that comes up in a number of complaints, and which could focus delivery of particular training in a certain area to address those particular issues that might be of concern to your residents. Any questions, Chairman?
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to say, I'm fully supportive of this. It's something I've discussed with Democratic Services in the past regarding training for councillors, obviously making sure that we're doing our jobs as effectively as possible. Just one question regarding the timing of training, because I noticed for the strategy boards a number of weeks back, the training was during the day. Honestly, there are a lot of councillors, myself included, that do work during the day and can't actually get to those sessions. So can we give a little bit of thought to when these sessions take place? Yes, if we can have one during the day, perhaps a mirrored session could take place in the evening, perhaps the following week. So obviously as many councillors can get to these sessions as possible.
Councillor Fowler, you indicated.
I was actually going to ask a similar question and add to it. Who will decide what's mandatory and who will decide what's voluntary? Because a lot of training sessions, a lot of people go to. We've got a big council now, and there will be some people who don't go to any of the sessions. And not all of them will need to be mandatory, but there'll be some. If you're serving on certain areas of the council, you will need to have had training before you can do that work.
Thank you. Just on that, I think for you, you would receive reports, and you would get reports on attendance and or a lack of. And I think we would also be looking at informing group leaders as well. So you've got that, where there are groups, political groups, you have got that opportunity then within a group to encourage. So we will be compiling, attendance at training, highlighting that with groups and with yourselves, so that you can then assess the effectiveness or what are the issues about attendance. Is it a timing issue, or is it a lack of motivation, or is it the wrong sort of training? In terms of we would be identifying as officers and as presumably as chairs of committees what you or we thought was mandatory. We can't force members to attend, however. There is no, it's not, we don't have that employee-employer relationship where you can force attendance or discipline a member of staff for not attending, which is why you would be using you, hopefully, as a committee overseeing this, but also the group structure to also encourage that.
I think Councillor Andy's point is important. You know, some people with family commitments would find a daytime training session much better. Others with work commitments would find an evening session much better. And I think we need to take that on board.
Wholeheartedly agree. We will obviously look at the timing of meetings. Wherever possible, we will capture meetings as well. We'll capture some training. So, for instance, in the recent planning training, we video recorded that. It was conducted in Christchurch. We haven't got those facilities everywhere, but that's moving forward. We would probably wish to capture some of the key points through that process. Certainly, we'd like to manage a library of the resources that we deliver as well, so the PowerPoint slides, handouts that we might have. But equally, I do accept that clearly the timing and a daytime and an evening meeting mix would clearly be appropriate.
I think mandatory, if you sit on a quasi-judicial committee like planning or licensing, certainly my experience in the past is you were not allowed to sit on that committee until you had done that training. Other committees it's not quite so important, but certainly those two are very important.
Yeah, just sort of building on that. Speaking about how we've been talking about like opening up transparency, especially towards like the public as well. I'd think it'd be good to have sort of like the way in which all our attendances at these boards and committees are recorded. If we had almost a public checks sheet which could be looked at, like what is your councillor trained in, and then the sessions which they've attended, being that they're available in both ways that people can attend in the evening and the day, that can be gone through, and then not only the public know where we've been, we all know who's trained in what, and people can get the help they need knowing what we're all knowledgeable in.
Have members any further questions on this? Councillor Andrews.
It's not a question, more of an observation. In terms of training skills, me and probably other people around the table are of an age whereby the World Wide Web and everything like that wasn't invented when we went to school or everything like that. It's training on social media, internet usage and computer skills to make full use of the laptops councillors have been given in lieu of tons of paper coming through the letterbox. And that skill of being able to make use of the internet or whatever is actually going to dovetail into all these various subjects here, because obviously if having been to a training session we are spurred to into a particular subject, and if we are given some assistance how to find out more information, we can go online to some of these video conferences which have been available on the internet and carry on our study and research. And it would be excellent if members could, if on a particular subject they want to get more training on, could be given links to appropriate seminars which are available from the local government association. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, we asked when we handed out the IT equipment a self-assessment in terms of your skills in IT, and we're using that information to try and build a programme for councillors in terms of IT. I think you need to bear with us in many respects because we have some major projects taking place for IT, and clearly you are part of that project. We are all part of that project, but it is on the radar. What I'm intending, in fact I was discussing earlier today, we'd like to sort of organise a series of drop-in sessions for councillors just to come in with particular issues they may have. Some of those will be with their equipment, and we're going to publicise those probably in for late July. Clearly we appreciate August, but we're trying to avoid the holiday period. But again, we are looking to deliver a whole series of different workshops from that. In terms of the library, certainly, absolutely agree. We wish to build that library, create a zone that you can go into as councillors, easily navigable. But again, that is in train, but it can't happen overnight in that sense. But we can certainly try and push out some information when we make it available to you through the Modern Gov system. We can capture that. We can capture attendance in that, addressing the point of Councillor Rigby. We can start to capture some of those attendances on training sessions if that's what members would like us to do. At the moment we're not publishing attendance at training, but we can certainly do that. But having said that, the reports that you would get back periodically on training and delivery of the training framework would include statistics around attendance as well.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope we're not entirely straying from the point, but I take what Councillor Andrews said. It's fine using IT and everything else if it does the job required. I don't mind getting the agendas on here. What I do have a problem with is that everything we get on here is read-only. So I can't read the agenda and make notes of questions I want to ask or issues I want to raise because it's read-only. You can't do anything with it. So quite frankly, it's nowhere near as good as the ancient system we had in Poole. What we have there, we still is now appears to be redundant, can't be used. The IT services there are great. If you walk in with an issue, that's fine. But then you're using the equipment and you find another issue that's coming up. Well, you can't do this because why not? You know, you can't. It will say you can't open an item for one reason or another. I find if I bump it about 10 times, it will generally open. Apparently there is another way of doing it, which I have yet to discover. But it isn't up, the system we've got is not up to standard, quite frankly, and until it is, then I think we either need to rely on a bit more paper, which I'm reluctant to do, or some better, and just, you know, it's all right saying, well, I'll drop in when I've got a problem. But I don't know I've got a problem till I'm using it. I've got a problem because I can't print anything, and half my constituents write to me. Well, how do I write back to them? And keep a copy for myself? Do I laboriously write something out? My handwriting isn't the best these days. And do I then copy that? Or what? There are real issues raised. And I don't know about Marcus, but I grew up with a Meccano set, and I can, you know, build you a typewriter or a Meccano or anything else. But these are a mystery, and when they're not working, they're not working.
Councillor, you're not the only one, believe
No, I
you me.
appreciate that, Chairman. I do appreciate that.
I grew up, like Marcus, in the era before computers.
Yes,
So
they weren't invented.
I'm still like, I think my 5-year-old grandson can do better than me.
Well, Chairman, I used to teach business studies, and the electric typewriter was quite an innovative thing.
Okay, members, I think we've discussed this quite thoroughly. Unless members are not happy, can I have a proposal? Councillor Filer, seconder. Councillor Rigby, can I take a vote on this then? All in favour? Yep. Unanimous again. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 8. Who's going to lead on this one? Need I ask?
Thank you, Chairman, members. This report is bringing to you a flowchart to assist members in considering whether they have an interest at a meeting. Members at the moment are encouraged, and clearly do, ask the monitoring officer or myself for advice in advance of a meeting if they have a particular interest, declarable interest in it, or possibly declarable interest in a meeting item. But very often members will get to meetings, something may be said in the meeting, there may be papers circulated, or suddenly they recognise somebody in the audience they may have an acquaintance with, and they then need to seek advice at that point. The traditional method is to ask the Democratic Services Officer for advice. They haven't got all the background information, and it's putting them on the spot. Probably unfairly, I would probably say, when the onus is clearly on the councillor to decide whether or not they have the interest. So the purpose of this flowchart is to give members some, ask themselves some questions on a particular issue. They can do that obviously during the meeting or in advance of the meeting, and they can then make up their own judgment as to whether or not they have a disclosable interest and whether they should or should not take part in that meeting or vote. It would appear on every agenda, so it's part of the template for the agenda front sheets. So it's a quick, easy reference to that. Again, part of your role is to encourage and maintain high standards of ethical governance and adherence to the Code of Conduct, and this is seen as a step to help members achieve that. So again, you're asked to consider supporting the introduction of the flowchart on every agenda. Any questions, Chairman?
It's on everything, but this one, I don't get this at all, because we've got interest, we've got non-pecuniary interests, pecuniary interests, personal interests, and it doesn't sort of put them here. And I personally have always erred on the side of caution. Would be accused of having an interest and not declaring it. I'd rather declare it and not be able to speak on it. And I don't think this makes it clear enough. I don't understand the difference. I've always usually asked Tanya or one of the Democratic Services people, and they'll say, no, that's non-pecuniary. If you're, for the new councillors here, if you're a member of the Scout, if you're the leader of the Scout pack, or you do whatever it is you do, and an item's on the agenda to do with that Scout pack, you have to declare it. Well, I don't think this, or a governor of a school, which lots of us will be, I don't think this makes that clear. I think this is the bare bones of it without the detail of it.
It's intended as a guide. So obviously, as councillors, you've all declared your registrable and disclosable pecuniary interest that you've submitted. That had to be done within 35 days of election, and they are all published on the website. So the top part of that flowchart starts off with the question, is it on that list? And that's a yes or no, and then it flows from there in terms of that top part. Usually, I'll be honest, it's not normally disclosable pecuniary interest that members struggle with, because it's quite clear it's on my register. It is directly relating to that, and therefore I have an interest. Usually the question is around the bottom part of that flowchart, which is around the principles of bias and predetermination, which is almost impossible, I'll be honest, for a Democratic Services to answer what is in your mind as a councillor. And that is very much for you to determine whether you are, in that meeting, whether you are sitting there truly open-minded to listen to the debate, or whether you have bias or predetermination in that matter. So it's really the bottom part that is of key there in terms of the typical items that come up at committees, in my view. And I think that is only a councillor, in my view, can make that judgment. So it's there as an aid for you to, if you're sat in a scrutiny meeting, planning meeting, to ask your question, those particular questions in relation to that item, and decide whether or not you should participate in the meeting.
Chairman, I don't agree, because there's things that you belong to. There's things, I mean, I belong to West Hants Tennis Club. I think I have no financial interest whatsoever if they were to put in for planning, for example, none at all. But it's something that I've been told in the past I ought to declare. And I don't think most of us would even consider being a school governor. I still think we'd need to ask if an item of something we belong to, where we don't have we're not standing to gain by what's on the agenda in any way at all. On the other hand, we are members, and school governing bodies have certainly come under that. So I think it needs to be a bit expanded, because it doesn't mention those sort of things. I think most councillors are school governors, or an awful lot are. So I think it needs to be expanded.
Yeah, Chairman, I appreciate the point, and it can be just somebody you know who's an acquaintance, somebody who's a close friend, somebody who's a neighbour, a constituent who's been banging on your door for months. We have a responsibility to make sure their view or their representations are heard. We don't have a responsibility to support them. So if you've said to somebody, I understand your concerns, I'll make sure they're heard, that's fine. If you say, I've heard your representations and I'll absolutely support you, that isn't fine. And it's quite clear on most things, when we come to committee, we should be prepared. In planning, it's easy, you're listening the applicant as much as to the objectors, and some objectors don't like that. But actually, if you say, I'll make sure your point is heard, but I can't necessarily vote for it because I've got to consider the other side as well, and I'll make up my mind at the time. Most people actually accept that. And actually that really applies to all committees and all areas where we get representations from the public. We can plainly see the people's point of view when they're worried about something in their particular area. But the excuse is, well, not in my area, I don't care if you do it down the road, it's not good enough. It's either, is it okay anywhere, or isn't it? And, you know, those are the best ways. And I haven't found a problem with residents when I explain that to them either. But people who say, oh, I'll support you, they shouldn't even take part in the debate because they have plainly predetermined before they come into it.
Chairman, I was only going to suggest that if members are concerned with this paper in its current, or the flowchart in its current format, we could defer this to the next meeting in October. We could include it into the workshop in September and actually redesign it and come up with what actually would work for members. If you do have genuine concerns, I'd rather not put it on there if it's going to cause confusion. Clearly, I don't want that to happen. But equally, I'm equally trying to identify a better way than asking a Democratic Services officer who knows none of the facts, putting them on the spot in a meeting for advice when they clearly can't provide that advice. So it's a balance, really. So I'm happy to defer it if you would rather have that and bring it back in October.
Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Looking at Appendix 1, which is the document which is intended to fill in a blank page which appears on most agenda sheets. At the end of the first paragraph it says, of course, yes, you know, if you're in any doubt, look at Part 6 of the Council's Constitution. Well, the 76 councillors aren't going to be carrying around the council's constitution with them all the time. What would be a good idea is that if we actually put a link there, whereby obviously you've got it on your laptop, you can actually instantly click on the link and get the constitution up if you think you want to check the constitution. And at the end of the second paragraph, going back into the background paper, item 3, where it says, look, if a councillor is in any doubt, perhaps seeks guidance of the Democratic Services Officer. Again, that bit of advice is lost here. We can read it in this committee meeting here, but when you're just about to sit down for a council meeting and you've got Appendix 1 in front of you, or the day before the council meeting, you think, oh gosh, perhaps I need some guidance. It might be useful, again, to have links to a particular officer or even to the department so that the councillor can make contact. So that they can say, yes, I am a member of a particular club or society whereby they've got a planning application in. I need guidance as to whether I can even attend the meeting or even speak or even vote.
Agreed. Yes.
Well, members, the suggestion is this be deferred to go back to the officers for tidying up and some amendment. Hopefully to come back in September, because I think the more we delay it, it's not letting other members in other committees see it and take advantage of it.
And perhaps a number of issues have been raised. Perhaps members should write into Richard with those particular issues, and he can consult and see if they should be included or not. It's not, I mean, Mr. Jones has produced the report for us. It's all right sitting here and poking at it and expecting a rewrite, but we need some guidance of where we'd like any change, if any, is required.
I'll welcome any contributions, Councillor.
I thought you might. If you don't get any, we'll have a...
Right, members, you've heard that Mr. Jones will welcome any suggestions. So we'll adjourn this matter and defer it till the September meeting. Thank you.
Gentle touch with a warm finger is what
Item 9 is the work programme. Richard, do you want to lead on this again?
Again, this is a fairly short report, Chairman, really just pulling together a work programme for your future meetings, clearly needing to be amended to reconsider the Declaration of Interest flowchart or alternative option. The dates of meetings are set out in paragraph 4. The next meeting is scheduled for the 8th of October. Actually, I put 9th of June there, I should have said 9th of July, actually in the first bullet point. So 8th of October is your next meeting in Christchurch. They're all at 6 o'clock. Then 14th of January 2020 in Poole, and 28th of April 2020 in Bournemouth. Section 6 sets out what my suggestion in terms of your work programme. It's for you to determine your work programme, but obviously in the 8th of October we would amend that to bring forward the flow chart option. We talked about September. September was suggested for a workshop to allow you to review the code of conduct, constitutional elements, and obviously that the arrangements for dealing with complaints and the flowchart.
Seeing these are fairly well spaced apart, what is the situation if for some unfortunate reason we do get a complaint that falls in between these big time slots? Obviously it's not desirable to leave it sitting on the shelf too long, because that wouldn't go down well with the public, and I think the member that is the receiver of the complaint would want to try and get it resolved as soon as possible. So are we able to call extra meetings as required?
Yes, Chairman. I think the complaints will be dealt with in accordance with the process. So the initial filtering that you'll be doing and that consultation will be happening all of the time. As soon as a complaint comes in, that will be dealt with in the timescale. If you, as members, decide that it warrants an investigation, we'll investigate that. It might be a complex matter. We might have external people coming in to do that, or it might be something that we would do internally. After that investigation, we would suggest that you would be then calling a special meeting of the Standards Committee to consider that report and that matter only. So in a sense, these are your ordinary meetings. We'd expect any results of investigations on formal complaints to be dealt with at separate meetings that you would convene as and when required. The dates may fall, appropriately, but normally you would call a separate meeting to do that. So you wouldn't be waiting for the next quarterly meeting.
Members, have you any observations to make on this? Councillor Stripley?
Not quite on that, Chairman, but Mr Jones mentioned some dates running into next year. My preceding council used to provide us with a paper diary, and I have to say I find that so much better than any other sort of diary. I don't know if this council is going to provide them or if I need to fend for myself. So perhaps we could have some advice on that.
I think, Chairman, if I may, I think through the Shadow Authority we made a commitment that the new council, when it was formed, would be electronic as far as possible, and therefore we would provide Outlook and Modern Gov. There's a mechanism, and we'll show you how to make notes on those and how to make comments and how you can record your own comments on that system as we go forward. But I think that was the commitment that the preceding council made.
Well, members, that concludes the business for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I don't know whether we need to take a formal vote on item 9. It's just noting the dates of the meeting, so I think I can formally close the meeting and thank you all for attending, especially hoping that the Wessex Way is now not having tarmac laid in the middle of the day.